Hello, Lux On Demand family. My name is Greg, and I am so excited to welcome you here on YouTube. Typically, we do our services live every Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. EST at twitch.tv/Lux Digital Church. We get to chat with you live and talk with you live every week there. But we are also honored that you have joined us here on demand on YouTube. We have a lot of awesome resources and videos that you can check out here on our channel. But right now, I just want to introduce you to the talk that we have and say that I really hope that you enjoy. Thank you for joining us. We love you guys.
Thank you guys so much for being here with us tonight, and I just want to give a special thank you to Doc. Thank you so much, Doc, for being willing to come and to pray for our community and to pray for our church. I always really appreciate that. Guys, I'm just going to give you a heads up. I'm going to be drinking probably more water than normal tonight because there might just be a few pauses or breaks. I woke up with a really bad sore throat in the middle of the night last night, really like the wee hours of this morning, and I've been sick throughout the day. Nothing too bad, just like my typical spring thing that I get. So I have been a little bit under the weather, so you have to stick with me if I speak a little bit slower tonight than normal. I want to welcome y'all here. First off, if you're here for the very first time, my name is Mark. I'm the pastor here at Lux Digital Church, and we are a real church. Like, we're a real, actual, entirely online church. This pastor is like, hey, Saint Bear, good to see you tonight. Thanks for coming and joining us, brother. And we are an actual, real online church, an entirely online community of believers that are spread all across the globe. And no matter what you believe or what you went through today or what you've done or what's been done to you, we want you to know that we're glad that you're here and that you are welcome here in our community. We have thought about you. We've prayed for you. We're glad that you've come out to join us. So thank you so much for being here tonight. You've given us a portion of your Wednesday night, and you might be, playing Apex on another screen while you're listening to me, and that's okay too. We're just really, really glad that you're here. So thank you so much for giving us a chunk of your time and being here and joining us. If you are joining us later on demand over VOD or YouTube or on podcast, especially if you're here over YouTube, I want to challenge you to take a next step, and that is, would you drop a comment in the chat or in the description of the episode, the comments? I'm not good with YouTube, and just let us know where you're joining us from. We'd love to meet you as well. And we know we have a really robust and amazing on-demand family. Lots of people who don't always come and join us here live, and we want to let you know that you're important to us, and we're glad that you're here. So thank you so much. Soggy Toasts. Oh my gosh, there's two people with toasts. Hello, how's everyone doing this lovely day? It is a lovely day, Soggy Toast. Thank you so much for coming in and joining us. My name is Mark, and it's a joy and a pleasure to have you here at Lux Digital Church with us tonight. Right now, we are in the middle of a series. We have Shock the Toast and Soggy Toast. I can't get over that. It's going to be insanely distracting to me throughout this, which is amazing and so funny. And what's even better is Shock the Toast has his own emotes and everything that go along with toast, which is phenomenal. The past few weeks, we've been in this series called Fear Not, and we've been talking about different areas of fear in our life, and then how we need to overcome or beat that fear, or at least face that fear in our life in order to live in freedom. And so the last 2 weeks, we talked about the freedom or the fear of what people think about us, and then we talked about the fear of failure. And this week, we're tackling something that's, honestly, I think it's a little bit bigger, and maybe not for you, but I think in general, it's something that is, I think, a little bit more pervasive in our culture and something that is harder to face and harder to overcome. We're going to turn our attention and begin talking about the fear of the future or the fear of the unknown. And I think for a lot of us, the fear of the future, the fear of the unknown, which ties pretty intimately into the fear of change, can be a really crippling emotion. It can be something that's really hard for us to overcome. And in this series, we've been going through we have a key point for each series here at Lux. And so we have a key statement, and then we also have been coupling that with a quote from Yoda. Originally, like I said last week, to honor the fact that Obi-Wan was coming out, but now I don't like Obi-Wan, so I'm less about honoring it, but I am all about honoring Yoda. So our key statement for this series is this: fear and freedom don't coexist. Fear and freedom don't coexist. And what I mean by that is that fear, even good fear, limits us, right? Even the fear of touching something hot, knowing that we'll we'll get burned, or the fear of, whatever, drowning, and so we don't go out in really deep water in the ocean. Those fears limit what we're capable of doing in good ways. But there are other fears in our life that limit what we're able to do in really negative ways. And when we bow our knee to those fears, and when we become enslaved to those fears, it prevents us from living into the freedom that we were intended to live in. And so if we want to live our life with this really incredible feeling, and also just reality of being able to live freely in to who we were created to be, who we were meant to be, our purpose and our intention and our drive, like all of those things are locked if we bow our knee to fear. And my experience has been that there's just a tremendous number of people in online communities who honestly, like, they act like they're not scared of anything, right? But like the whole like trolling people and flaming people and acting like we're not afraid is oftentimes this goal to mask the fact that we really are afraid. We're afraid of being alone, or we're afraid of being seen as a failure, or we're afraid of not measuring up, or we're afraid of not getting to where we want to get to in life. And so we go into online worlds and we seek sort of affirmation about who we are as people by building up our character and trolling on League, or trashing kids on Fortnite. Whatever it is that we do those things to avoid things that were actually very real fears. So when we look at the fear of the future, there's this really interesting quote by Yoda, and it comes from The Empire Strikes Back, which arguably maybe the best Star Wars movie out of the ones that are out, maybe the exception of Rogue One. And it says this, Yoda says this when he's talking to Luke, and he says, difficult to see, always in motion the future is. Difficult to see, always in motion the future is. My wife and I were watching The Empire Strikes Back because we're watching through all 9 Star Wars movies right now together. And a couple of weeks ago, right before like Stranger Things came out and we were on that binge, we were watching The Empire Strikes Back together. And I was actually caught off by that quote. It's been a long time since I've seen The Empire Strikes Back. And so there's this point in which Luke is in training with Yoda, and he gets this vision of Han and Leia, who are suffering on Bespin and on the Cloud City where Lando is. And Luke becomes really distraught about that. And he goes to Yoda and he asks if they're going to be okay. And this is kind of what Yoda says, like, hey, difficult to see, always in motion the future is. It's hard to know. We don't know what is going to happen to them. And there's this moment where Luke's fear of what might happen in the future to his friends paralyzes and makes him incapable of embracing what he has in his present. Because there's something really beautiful and awesome about what's going on in that present moment for him. He's being trained as a Jedi. He's being equipped to face off against Vader. And he needs that training. Like, he needs the blessing of the time with Yoda in order to be fully equipped and prepared to face off against Vader. And of course, he ends up leaving. The fear cripples him. He leaves. He goes to try to rescue Han and Leia. That ends up being disastrous. And we see the end of episode 5, where the Empire and the Siths are on top. They have an upper hand inside of the struggle that's going on across the galaxy. Why? Well, largely because Luke's fear of the future prevented him from embracing the beauty and the blessing of the present. And I have this to say, because I think this is an important point. The fear of the future robs us of the blessings of the present. The fear of the future always robs us of the blessings of the present. When we're afraid of tomorrow, we struggle to really embrace and see the beauty in today. It's really hard to see what God is doing in our lives today when we're constantly worried about what's coming up in the future and we're trying to control it. So back in March of 2020, there was all of these rumors, and it was actually earlier than March of 2020. It was probably like January of 2019 that I first heard the rumors that there was this sickness that was sort of breaking out in China. And at first, I sort of like blew it off. Like, what's a big deal? That's never going to impact me. It sounds like it's being blown out of proportion. All of those things. I've never been a person who's trusted the news. Like literally never. It just made sense that they would lie to me. So why would I ever like intentionally go and watch them? I was on that hype train at like 13, by the way, guys, way before everybody else got on the don't trust the news hype train in 2020. And so, in 2020 though, I remember it building and the news about what was happening and how COVID-19 was spreading was growing. Hey, good to see you, Yoshi Cake. Glad to have you here with us. And so the at the time, like the fear of what was coming down the pike didn't seem very real to me. I sort of brushed it off, and I kept saying, "We'll never really hear about that, or that'll blow over, or this will be like another bird flu, or whatever it was." And we had the bird flu and the swine flu and everything, and we were coming up in a political year, and I was like, "Well, this is clearly being leveraged." But as things began building, there began have a lot of questions about like what was the actual nature of this thing, and then suddenly it was like, well, maybe this thing is a lot more serious than what I originally thought it was, and that's when I really began considering like, well, what are the long-term implications of this? And then in March of 2020, I live in the state of Pennsylvania. Our state shut down, our church shut down, my job shut down, everything shut down, and we were told to go stay in our houses for 2 weeks, which, by the way, I think the biggest lie of the pandemic was 2 weeks to flatten the curve, by the way. I don't know how we all forgot about that debacle, but 2 weeks to flatten the curve is ridiculous. And so, after the 2 weeks was up, obviously the curve wasn't flattened, but we were in the beginning of the pandemic, and at first it was kind of cool because it was like, oh, okay, like I don't have to go to work, and like I get to stay home with my family, and I could play video games, and like, yeah, okay, a couple of weeks with my kids and my gaming PC actually seemed pretty awesome. I had an MMO that I was playing. I had hundreds of hours worth of tabletop board games that I could play solo or with friends. I had an RPG group that I could hang out with. Like all of those things seemed great. So at first it was like, oh, this is actually pretty cool. But it didn't stay that way. I would say after the first couple of days, what I thought was going to be really cool didn't end up being all that cool. What I thought was going to be awesome and really life-giving ended up being really draining because I didn't realize how much going to work it had given me purpose. And so without going to work, I had lost a great sense of purpose. And as I was listening to the news stories that were coming out and I was hearing about what was going on around the world, I began to become afraid. Like I remember being really afraid of like, what world was my daughter's going to grow up in? Are we ever going to come out of this? And all of a sudden, like, we needed information really quickly and didn't have any of it at our fingertips. Like, there was so much that we needed, and there was so much confusion about what was right and what was wrong. And then after all of that stuff was like done, then there was like there was confusion about whether we could trust the information, and we needed a reliable information. It was like there was none to be found, and there was so much fighting and division and stuff that was going on amongst that. And I was looking at our culture, I was looking at our world, even in the first week, and I was like, man, something is really, really, really screwed up here. And I remember thinking, like, what if, like, I don't know if this is like this blows over in a couple of weeks and we're not going to talk about it again, or if this is like a Thanos snapping his finger and killing half the population situation. And I thought, like, well, the pandemic is probably somewhere between those two things, but I don't know that it is. And so I got scared. Now, a lot of people, like, fear was like the trigger word during that season of life, and no one wanted to admit to being afraid. But I think everybody, at least in the unknown nature of it, looked to the future. And for the first time in a long time, for me, the future looked bleak. And I'm a pretty optimistic person. Like, even when life sucks, I'm pretty optimistic about tomorrow. Like, generally speaking, I'm excited about life. Generally speaking, I count my blessings. Generally speaking, I don't get afraid of what the future holds. I have a generally pretty optimistic view of our ability to be resilient despite whatever the world throws at us. But I remember there was it was in the first week, that first weekend after we shut everything down, and we were finally doing some landscaping around our house that we hadn't done yet. And I had almost a full-on panic attack. It got to the point where I was edging beds and we were cutting new beds and getting rid of some around our house. And in that moment, I called my counselor and I was like, I need to meet with you. Like, we need to chat. I hadn't met with him in a couple of months because I just knew that I needed help. And I think all of us, if we're honest, know that at certain points in life, like, we've been there. Maybe it wasn't during the pandemic for you, but it was when you were younger, or maybe it was when you had someone in your life who was really sick and you didn't know what the future was going to hold. But there's been times in life when each of us have been paralyzed by a fear of what tomorrow might bring. We've been scared of the future, and that has robbed us of the joy and the blessings of the day. But we're not the only people to have gone through that. There's many, many people groups who've gone through it before, and the Israelites were one of them. In fact, we are going to look tonight at a passage of Scripture that might be one of the most iconic and uplifting passages of Scripture you could find. Let's go ahead and throw it on the screen. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future." Jeremiah 29:11. It's the type of passage that you put on a plaque and you put up above your fridge, right? Or above your TV, right? It's the type of thing that people get tattooed on their wrist. And it's a really good passage to kind of pull out of context and be like, look how uplifting this is. God wants to prosper you and make you happy. But if you don't know the context of it, then you don't know how truly powerful the passage is, because so much of the significance of this passage in Jeremiah comes from that. So first off, the book of Jeremiah is a letter, but it's really not a letter and really not a book. It's a collection of all of the things that Jeremiah had taught. God had told Jeremiah to gather together your prophecies and your teachings and your oracles and compile them together. And a scribe came and compiled those things together, and he put in sections about Jeremiah's life to link those things to one another. And I can't give you an overview of the entire book of Jeremiah tonight, but you can watch it after we're done, because the Bible Project has actually made one, and we're going to put the link for it in the chat right now, and you can go and watch a 7-minute, beautifully done and illustrated overview of everything about the book of Jeremiah. And if you haven't checked out the Bible Project yet, this is a really great time to do it. After service tonight, check it out, because they have an overview of pretty much every single book of the Bible. Josh, if you could hit !project in the chat for that, that would be really helpful, because that will give you a link to the Bible Project overview of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah 29 is sort of this turning point in the book of Jeremiah. In Jeremiah 29, we're getting the image of something that's coming for the Israelites, because Jeremiah 29 is really all about the exile. It's really about something horrible that's going to come. See, Jeremiah lived right before, during, and after the Babylonian exile of the Israelites. Now, if you're wondering kind of where this takes place in the narrative, we have the beginning, which is the creation narrative, and then we have the judges, and then we have the kings, and then the nation of Israel splits into Israel and Judah, and then we get a series of prophets, and one of those prophets that comes is Jeremiah. The kings have become more and more wicked, and the people of Israel have become consistently more evil, and God has decided to punish them, and he warns them through Jeremiah that if you do not turn your hearts back to me, then I am going to use the Babylonians to punish you. They're going to destroy your city. They're going to take you as captives. You're going to be absolutely wrecked by these people. They don't listen to Jeremiah. It's actually literally what happens. Jeremiah warns them in his letters that eventually the temple was going to be torn to the ground. It was one of the wonders of the ancient world. People came from all over the Middle East just to see the temple that Solomon, the son of David, had built, the third king of Israel. And the Israelites largely believed that they were pretty much invincible as long as the temple continued to stand. And Jeremiah says, no, you're not invincible. In fact, God is going to give you into the hands of the Babylonians, and they're going to tear the temple to the ground, but the Israelites do not listen. And that's not even the most horrible thing. In fact, there's passages in the book of Jeremiah where he talks about the fact that the Jewish people, as they're captive inside the city of Jerusalem during the siege, would turn to cannibalism, trading off, eating each other and eating each other's children in order to survive. Some of the most horrific and horrible pieces of medieval warfare and medieval siege would take place right in Jerusalem, and it did. The Babylonians came, they laid siege to the city, they tore down its walls, they tore down the temple, they purged and slaughtered thousands and thousands of people, and those that were left, the poor and the unimportant, they marched as slaves to Babylon. All of that stuff actually takes place. And Jeremiah warns them that it's going to. So in all of those sort of horrific things that had happened, all of the horrific things that are going to happen, Jeremiah says this, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future." When did the Israelites ever listen? Very rarely, Bushi. But what future? I mean, it was over. Their city was destroyed. Their temple was torn down. Their people were slaughtered. They had seen the absolute worst of the worst that the world had to offer them. Those that were remaining were dragged off to Babylon, where they were enslaved and indoctrinated into Babylonian customs and culture and religion. What was left? What future? But God speaks to them in the heart of the most horrific things that were coming their way. A future that didn't just look bleak, but was grim. A future of intense suffering. And God says to them, I have plans for you, plans not to harm you. I have plans to give you a hope, and I have plans to give you a future. The reality is, during the pandemic, whenever I was stepping into fear, or in any area of your life, when you looked to the future and it seemed difficult or bleak, and you became fearful and anxious, we become chained down by those things. that fear can overcome our lives. And so we have to learn, what can we do when we're afraid of what the future holds? And the Bible is really clear, because here in the book of Jeremiah, God didn't say, I'm going to take it all away from you. I'm going to make it really good. It's going to be super shiny and really fun. He says, no, like, this horrible things are coming, but have faith, because I am choosing to salvage you. Your people won't be gone. You will rebuild the temple. I have a future that is still in store for you. Guys, the reality is you nor I have any control over what would happen tomorrow. And the vast majority of our lives are often spent trying to manipulate and control what tomorrow would bring. But if you think about it, it's the exact opposite of the way that we should live as followers of Jesus. If you grew up in the church, you probably said the Lord's Prayer dozens of times, if not hundreds of times. We say it here every month at Lux whenever we do the Lord's Supper on the first Wednesday of the month. And in that prayer, we say out loud, Jesus, give us today our daily bread. And the reality is, most of us don't need to say that prayer. Most of us have enough bread in our fridge. We have enough food at our fingertips to last days, if not weeks, if not months, are available to us. And I think if God honored that prayer and gave us only what we needed for today, we would feel abandoned by him. But he would just be answering the prayer that we have echoed and we have prayed. God, give us today the food that we need. And I don't think it's just about food. When Jesus said that, I think he was saying, would you trust my Father with tomorrow? Would you trust God with more than just, would you trust God with the future? Would you give it over to him? Would you have faith that he has good things for you in store, and the bad things that will come, he wants to grow you through. He doesn't waste those things. Can you trust that God will carry you through whether life sucks or whether life is great? Can you trust that my Father will provide for your daily needs? Can you quit being obsessed with controlling tomorrow because you are jeopardizing and sacrificing the blessings of today? One thing that I find every time I'm in a foreign country that's beautiful and so life-giving is the joy of the people who have nothing. When I was in Uganda, when I was in Haiti, when I was in Cuba, when I had those experiences, I experienced people who had so very little than I did, yet they were able to embrace and fully trust God for tomorrow while really engaging in the blessings of that day. And that enabled them to be freed up and have joy because they weren't constantly plagued by the fear of what tomorrow might hold. And guys, fear looks different for each person, but fear isn't just limited to worrying about suffering or worrying about things won't play out the way that you want them to. It's also being anxious that you're able to control and get the correct outcome out of tomorrow. Tomorrow isn't in your control. It's not in my control. You can prepare for it, but you can't manipulate it. It's not for you. We must trust God. And even when life sucks, even in the siege, even when all hope seems to be extinguished, we have a God who says to us, no, I have a hope for you and a future for you. I desire to prosper you and not to harm you. Would you trust me with tomorrow? And I said every message in this series would come with an adjustment, something that we would start with and something that we would move to. And if we start with fear, it's a transition from fear to faith. From fear to faith. I know this is a hard one and it's abstract, but it's necessary. We don't need to be afraid of tomorrow. We need to have faith that God is in tomorrow. And that allows us to not only get away from the fear, but it also enables us to be freed up to enjoy the blessings of the day. The reality is, when we were in that first week of the pandemic, I had many things around me that were incredible blessings. I needed to reconnect with Jesus. I needed time off. I was burnt out. I was beat up. I was done. I needed time with my children. There was things around the house that I needed to get to. There were many hobbies that I enjoyed and loved that I should have poured my time into, but fear crippled my ability to embrace and enjoy those things. And instead of truly being able to absorb those things and be part of them and embrace them in the moment, the blessings that God had given me for that day, I was crippled by the fear of what might come tomorrow. You don't know what tomorrow will bring for you any more than I do. So let's trust God with tomorrow and have faith for tomorrow and embrace the blessings and the richness of the things that he's given us today. It's our next step this week. It's this. I will choose to leave the future in God's hands and focus on the present this week. I will choose to leave the future in God's hands and focus on the present this week. I really believe that if you caught yourself this week, and every time you caught yourself driving and absentmindedly worrying about the future, or every time you're at work and you sort of your stray thoughts become about some anxiety about what tomorrow might bring, I really believe that if you didn't embrace those things, but instead you intentionally said, God, take those things from me. It's yours. I have faith that you want to bring me into blessing tomorrow. I have faith that you have a future for me that's secure tomorrow. And whether tomorrow is easy or hard, God, I trust that it's what's best tomorrow. It's in your hands, Father. And then you refocused your attention to the blessings of the things that are around you that day and counted those things. I believe it would radically change your attitude and your optimism towards life. I think it would. I think you would find that you're able to live in the freedom of being able to embrace your children and love your family, of enjoy the things that God has created you to enjoy, to truly embrace the things that are around you, to soak up those things because God created you for that joy. He created you for that freedom. He never intended you to shoulder the burden of something that he's always shouldered the burden for. It's like going up to God and pulling a backpack off of him and insisting that we have to wear it, knowing full well that we can never bear the weight. Allow him to carry it. Let's pray. Father God, I love you and I thank you, and I thank you that the future is in your hands. And there has been so many things over this last year of starting Lux that I've looked to the future and it seemed uncertain. And I've been worried and I've been scared. And I've allowed those things to rob me of my freedom and my peace and my joy in the present. Help us, Father, to be a group of people who others find compelling because we are able to not worry about tomorrow. Father, how hard would it be to actually be part of a church, to actually be attracted to Christians who are just as afraid of tomorrow as everybody else? Help us to be people who are compelling because of the freedom and the joy and the peace that we live in, because we've trusted you through faith with everything else, and we've enabled ourselves to deal with the problems and embrace the joy of the present. And pray these things in your name, Lord. Amen.
On Demand family, I really hope you guys enjoyed that talk. Thank you so much for joining us here on YouTube. I know sometimes it's difficult for you guys to join us live on Wednesday evenings, and that's why we do the content on demand here on YouTube. That way you guys can watch it whenever it works for you. But if you ever have the opportunity to join us live, we would love for you to do that. We're live every Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. EST at twitch.tv/Lux Digital Church. One thing that you miss out on by joining us here on demand is the opening time of banter and then the closing segments of Ask Me Anything that we do right here on the couch live, where we get to talk to you. We always laugh. We have a ton of fun. We get to chat and just hang out live, which is a very unique experience. And we would love for you to join us with that. We would also like for you to join our Discord over at discord.gg/Lux Digital Church. That's really the home of our church. That's where we do life together day in and day out. We get to play games. We get to hang out. We get to chat. And that's where we grow together as a church family. So join us there. If you enjoy what we're doing here on YouTube and what we're doing with Lux as a whole, you can financially support us over at luxdigitalchurch.com. There's an opportunity to support us there. But nonetheless, we love you guys. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will talk to you very, very soon.